Thank you all.
Okay, so as I say, welcome to everybody. Some familiar faces, some not so, but lovely to see you, such a wide range of people here today. So this this conversation was inspired by a LinkedIn post of Eddie's that I spotted, talking about, or he was reviewing the government's net zero strategy from the perspective of projects and program managers. So we got chatting and we decided that was an excellent topic for a conversation club. So I'm not sure how much of an introduction Eddie needs. I've known Eddie for a very long time, and I think most people in project management probably know Eddie. Challenging, he's up for challenging our thinking, I think it would be fair to say. Eddie, feel free to say any more that you want to about yourself. And without further delay, I'm going to, oh, sorry, just to say, right, so I can't do the recording bit, but what I will still do, because Eddie's going to be screen sharing, if Steve comes in a minute, hopefully he can record. Would you all like to mute and take your cameras off? That'll help with bandwidth. And just leave Eddie and me, I guess, initially. I will mute for a while, but I'll also be keeping an eye on the chat. There are going to be some opportunities for questions, and then we'll make sure we have time for questions at the end. So without further ado, I think I'm going to hand over to you, Eddie.
Thank you.
Sharon, I don't know whether you can see it on yours. It does say somebody started the recording, so hopefully we're okay.
So thank you, Alan. Okay, it looks like Steve's here now, so I'm sure he will be managing that side of things. Oh, you're muted, Steve. Good to see you.
I said I'm stuck on the moon. That's why I can't get there.
Oh, right. Okay.
I've been waiting for a rocket for the last 3 weeks.
Okay. Well, I think you've
done it finally.
Okay. Well, I've introduced Eddie, so I think I've just handed over to Eddie. Okay. So we'll let Eddie make a start. So okay, I'll mute myself and take my camera off as well.
So first of all, thanks everyone for joining me. And we've got an hour. I'm hoping you can make it a conversation. I've broken it into sort of chapters so that we have lots of space for conversation. I did ask in advance if anyone had any specific topics, and I didn't get any requests. So I'm going to play my favorite hits rather than everyone else's. Let's share and go forward. So I'm assuming you can see this share. Let's start from the beginning about how we actually ended up here. It's a good place to start. So 2022, a client asked me about net zero. So I made the mistake of reading the government document on net zero. And up until that point, I had not realized how it had been put together and what it meant. I recommend you read it because you won't believe how dreadful it is, okay? Dreadful as not as in bad outcomes, but it's been done like by a consultant, but they didn't actually do the work themselves. They let an intern do it. The article I posted in LinkedIn came straight from that. I actually published it in Project Magazine, so you may have seen it there. And in there was a scorecard, and I'll take you through the scorecard, and then we'll have a look at the rest of the things. So I scored most of the things negatively. I've got along here a section on scope, solution, metrics, agility, stakeholder, benefits, and future proofing. So the scope, when you go through it, you'll discover that basically you're not sure what the scope is. It doesn't necessarily actually cover sustaining life. It's just a whole bunch of different things. And it looks at the UK, but almost as if it was separate from the rest of the world. So if a volcano goes off in Iceland, it's not built in anywhere. There's no thoughts in there. Then in terms of the solution itself, it's not clear how what's proposed actually resolves the problems, because it's not clear exactly what the problem is. So it's sort of, there's a sort of a proxy carbon problem, but they don't really explain that very well. In terms of metrics, and we'll get to this later as well, when it does say anything, it says stuff about carbon. If you read the LinkedIn article, I've got a joke at the start about flying off somewhere and then offsetting. Offsetting allows you to game the system. I can pretend I've planted 12 trees. Who knows? Nobody knows. And whose land are we planting on? And why don't we just plant the trees anyway and not bother with all this strategy? Agility, monitoring it. We're not clear where we're heading. So are we heading for half as much CO2 or twice as much carbon? They say net zero, but how do we monitor if we're going in the right direction? So if you're running a project, you would want to know where you're up to. Stakeholders, I'm going to push along because there are lots of inconveniences, but we're not sure they've actually engaged the stakeholders. Benefits, we're not sure whether the benefits exceed costs because there's no outline of what the costs are and the benefits are. So it's not really, you've got a business case to it. And in terms of future proofing, if we all end up with electric cars and electric everything and we get zapped by the EMF, we don't know whether that's going to happen or not because nobody looked to the future to see what happens. So those are the sort of scores which I gave the document. So come to 2024, and the piece I put together, if you saw it, had this spider's web because I wanted to highlight the spider. But first I need to tell you about myself. And for that, I need to explain about having superpowers. I have superpowers, but so do you. Everyone has superpowers because there's a realm where your particular experience, your life, your history, your knowledge makes you the most powerful person on that topic. And I'm going to pretend that I am the most powerful person on that topic for this particular thing. And I'll explain why I would suggest that. So I was born a long time ago. You heard Karen say that everyone knows because I'm really old. So this is a picture of my mother, Letitia. And I don't know whether you can see this conference over here, but this is the conference in Stockholm in 1972, which arose from this book. I don't know if you can see the book or not, but the book is called Silent Spring. It's by Rachel Carson. It was written in the 60s. And basically, the silent spring is you get to spring and there's no noise because everything's dead. And it's because all the chemical companies were killing us with DDT and stuff like that. So she was saying to the industrial complex, stop killing us. The industrial complex, of course, didn't want to stop killing us. So they arranged this conference and put it on the back of another book by a lady called Barbara Ward and a chap called Maurice Strong. And in that conference, they started talking about how human beings interact with the environment. And so it went from being a very, very simple discussion about life to all of a sudden a process for doing stuff. Now, my mother was really into sort of the real stuff, the plants, the animals. She was a parasitologist. And this is a poem she put together about our silent heritage. I mean, basically, we've inherited billions of years of the planet and millions of years of evolution, and we just carry on and we take our part in it. And she then went on to become a director of the United Nations Environment Program, which means that I have this thing running through my DNA. I then went on to go and do engineering at college. Oh, by the way, this is my first project. I built a go-kart with an engine with CO2, but we shall park that for a second. And on my doctorate, I worked on things like industrial use of heat exchangers. So I know lots about temperature. I spent 3 years measuring temperatures, to plus minus 4 or 5 degrees. We'll talk about that and what that means in terms of interpreting data as well. I then went on to work for Shell, which at the time was one of the biggest oil companies on the planet. But because I was really interested in the environment, this one here is a project I did where we were trying to clean up offshore gas systems by using bacteria. This is the Bacillus fluoxidans, and I managed to get patents and they went on and built it. This one here is my next part as an engineer. This is what we call pinch technology. I started working in a small group and we were doing energy reduction in factories. And we'd reduce the energy use by 50% odd, which means I understand how energy is generated, what is useful, how it comes about. This one down here, if you've ever eaten Flora margarine, this is the Flora margarine factory in Purfleet in Essex. It's my design. I won a European award for the most energy efficient factory in the world. So the reason I'm telling you this isn't to show off. I'm trying to give you context to the way in which I view environment. I went to City University. I studied marketing, international marketing. I worked with small companies, car companies, to try and get them moving. So loads of those ones. And then I worked at Ashridge Business School, where basically we had every single client across every single industry. So I've got that perspective. I've been working at Pentacle. Just to give you a context, my focus is on how-to, which is the project stuff, but we've worked with, almost every single large organization, and I've written about it. So my perspective on how-to is also very real. And now what I tend to do is work virtually, and that's where I woke up. Because I had a situation where I was trying to sell Cube. I'm not trying to sell it to you. And suddenly I was in trouble because everything I thought the world was doing wasn't what they were doing. I was keen that we build a world where things survive, but I was wrong. And so having given that particular explanation, one question very much quickly, Karen, can you look in the chat and just see whether anyone's highlighted any specific topics they want me to cover or they want me to avoid? And then if you can capture them, then I can roll through the next bit, and then we'll have a Q&A bit, and then we'll move on from there. So if you've got
I can't see the chat, Eddie. I'm going to defer to Steve. Steve, can you see the chat? But if I can't see it, I wonder if that means other people can't see it. So we might just have to take questions verbally.
Okay, first question, first two, if you've got a hope, shout, quick. Anything you want me to do is talk about in particular from your role, from your, is that yes, is that no?
Well, I'm going to prompt you on that point that was on your slide just now, because I know I've heard you talk about this before, about how it feels to be wrong.
Okay, great. I'm going to pick that up next. Okay, guys, if you haven't got any hopes and fears, when we get to the end of the session, you're not allowed to say, you didn't cover what I wanted, okay? Because you should have told me. Okay, so let's go into being wrong. This is the most important question for me in terms of learning in 2024. I just want you to think and tell me, just say it out loud. You don't, I won't hear you, but say it out loud in your room. How does it feel to be wrong? And if you need to use your arms or facial expressions, just go for it. How does it feel to be wrong? My guess is most of you will go, ugh, horrible. Some of you will say, well, I don't mind because I like learning, but it's not true. You feel grim, it's embarrassing, it's dreadful, etc. And that's what most people say when you say, how does it feel to be wrong? But actually, you were wrong in answering that question, because what you're describing isn't how it feels to be wrong. You're describing how it feels when you discover that you're wrong. Being wrong has no feeling. It feels just like being right. It's the discovery. And when you get that discovery, that's when you get into things like cognitive dissonance and so on, because it's a horrible, horrible feeling. Okay, so we all do our best to try not to be wrong. So when we come into this climate space, everyone's got their ideas of what's going on. There's complex politics and so on. I'm not going anywhere near that, but some of the things I say might just break your world. I apologize, and when you feel that horrible feeling, I apologize again, but don't get triggered. Please keep listening, okay? So if you know my work, you know one of the things I've talked about forever is the fact that the rate of learning used to be way ahead of the pace of change in the world, but the world's got faster and faster, more and more complex, and for most of us, we've been left behind. What does that mean? It means that in many, many situations, there's a high probability that whatever you believe firmly, or even the data you have, is incorrect. And I had that situation in 2019. This is a chap called Colin Cook. He was head of digital for Scotland. And I was trying to flog him Cube, okay? And Cube at the time, we'd been doing some stuff with one of our Swiss clients. This is a company called CSEM. And we managed to persuade them to get lots of grants, because in Switzerland, it's all in cantons. So if you are in your canton when you work, or you have your office there, you get lots of government grants. But they also needed to bring people together. So we managed to persuade them to work on Cube, to use the virtual offices on Cube and the classrooms and so on. And then when they were physically together, to continue working on this. So all their material was all virtualized in the VR world. Okay, so I went, let's go and flog this to other people. So I went to Colin Cook. And at the time, Scotland was basically flexing its environmental muscles with COP. They had a COP thing coming up. And I pitched to him this little PowerPoint here, which basically went along the lines of how digital saved the world, because he was director of digital. So I was bigging him up. No, it's not the whole presentation. Executive summary. Basically, if you do what I say, life is going to be great, really great. You know, if you can use VR, if you get 5% uptake, you're going to basically solve all your CO2 emissions and hit your target. So that was my pitch to him over here, okay? How did I get there? Well, it was really weird. When I was putting this presentation together, I went looking for, I'm an engineer by training, as I've shown you. I went looking for where does CO2 come from. I wanted a chart. Every chart I found didn't tell me where the CO2 came from. It told me which countries made the CO2. I couldn't find anything for ages which told me how the breakdown was. So knowing that China makes more CO2 than the UK, you cannot solve a problem. Bureaucrats who don't understand reality imagine you can by bullying people, but you can't, okay? Then I delved into it. I discovered things like residential energy, commercial energy, transportation energy, and these are the breakdowns. The top line is, I'm wearing this jacket, which you can probably see there's a little red light here. And the reason is this is a heated jacket. Why? Because I worked out that if you simply got people to stop heating the air in their rooms, which escapes out of the windows, Because think about it, you're in your home, you heat the air, it goes out the window. You get into your car, you heat the air in your car, it goes out the window. You go to your coffee shop, you heat the air, it goes out the window. You go to your office, the heat the air, it goes out the window. So all of that heating stuff is because you haven't understood the problem. When you go skiing, it's -20 and you don't freeze to death because you wrap up warm. I bought this because it's a heated jacket. So you can literally be in a room at any temperature and not have to worry about it. And if you do that, you've already passed what they were planning for the Paris targets in terms of CO2 production. So that was what I got to. How did I get there? Because as I was putting this presentation together, I realized that the problem was actually quite easy to solve as long as you put your head to it and started to resolve it. And that, guys, was when I realized I'd been wrong. I thought all the sustainability responsibility thing was actually about solving the problems of the world not being able to function, i.e. it's about the planet, but it wasn't. It was about goals. It was about metrics. And then I started looking at the language and I noticed people would use the words like clean. It's not scientific to say clean. No one's safe till we're all safe. Oh, that sounds a bit persuasive. Emergency, pollution. They call something like CO2 pollution. No, CO2 is just a gas. It's not pollution. So at that point, I realized there was something going on. If you know me, you probably know my persuasion map. My persuasion map basically says, how do you get people to do things? And I've mapped all the most common methods. And I noticed that at the top half here, there were things which were happening which were unethical and self-limiting. Guilt. If you don't save it, we're all going to die. Oh my goodness, there's a climate emergency, we're all going to die, etc. Threats of death. So a lot of the messaging was quite scary. Now, if you're a good person, you tend not to do that. If you have good intentions, you tend not to do that. So I got really worried and I looked around, I saw people making lots of money and I saw people writing books. And I'm going to stop at that point because that was my start of my awakening to say, hang on, what's this thing really about? Karen, can I pass it back and see if there are any comments or questions?
Yeah, okay. Feel free to unmute or raise your hand if you have a question or a comment to feed back to Eddie. I'm sure he'd like some interaction.
The right place, tell me as well, yeah? I guess, Karen, they're enjoying it or they've all left. One of the two.
Yeah.
Okay, so that carry on.
Looking at the names, I'm really surprised we're not getting some comments, actually.
Don't worry.
Oh, Adrian. Thank you, Adrian. Go for it.
No, I just wanted to say that the preamble and the context setting is brilliant. I'm just not sure where you're going to go with it. So I'm fascinated to see where you're going to go with it, and then we may all pile in. So okay, beware the deluge.
So I'm hoping to go to what the project managers and program managers do to actually fix the problems in a good way, in a real sustainable way, and in a way which actually is very responsible. That's why I'm going to end up with the sort of call to action. But I've got to get you there slowly. So what is the real problem? So if we were running a project, first thing we do is we go looking for the stakeholders, yeah? The ones who could kill us, the ones we need to support us, the ones betting on us, and we probably make some sort of stakeholder map, like this stakeholder grid, who's involved, who's not involved, going to benefit, and so we start teasing out these stakeholders. So what's the problem we're trying to solve? Okay, we're trying to save the planet. So what does that mean? We've got to find the stakeholders. So when I started realizing that there was something going on, I thought, who are the stakeholders? Well, the stakeholders look like this, because we're not the only form of life on the planet. So we have to think about that one. Oh, we have to think about my spider from earlier. Oh, this bird. Well, I can sort of speak bird. No, I can't speak bird. I can't talk to this stakeholder. Oh, and the cows. Yeah, they're our mates. They've been living alongside us for hundreds, about thousands of years. They're stakeholders as well. There's a little sort of insect here, another stakeholder. The entire thing is made up of stakeholders we can't communicate with. Our silent heritage is made up of silent stakeholders. And the problem we're trying to solve is not, in my very, very humble opinion, got anything to do with CO2. It's not about humans and CO2 and carbon. It's about habitat, okay? What is habitat? Habitat is where you live, okay? So you need a house, you need heating, that insect needs water, everyone has got a unique set of things to sleep, to grow, shade, and so on. And what happens is together, we build an ecosystem. You notice how in nature, you don't get piles of rubbish because everything eats everything else. And through evolution, we figured out how to do that. And so that's what a habitat is. And as long as you have a habitat, everything thrives. Part of the problem is human beings can change habitats. So for example, we can clear a whole forest or half a forest because we've got all these good machines. When you do that, everything dies because everything's dependent on everything else. We can put lots of plastic out in the sea. When you do that, everything dies because they haven't evolved to eat plastic. And so that damages the habitat of the crabs and everything else. So if you were to ask me, the story about saving the planet is a story about making sure that the habitat for all those stakeholders survives. So once you start talking about that, you realize the scope of net zero is probably not right as a strategic project. And that was why my head was starting to explode. That plus the fact that once I started looking at the numbers, I could come up with solutions which could solve carbon at no investment cost. And yet nobody was talking about it. And I've been told clever scientists and clever people and bureaucrats and teenagers were working on it. Okay, so that's the first step. If you're going to solve a problem, you need to engage your stakeholders. So let's pretend we've thought about all these other stakeholders. The second thing you go to is diagnosis. Now, most of us come to the conclusion it's all about bad human behavior. But if you're going to diagnose and get a problem fully understood, you have to understand what a problem is, especially a problem in an ecosystem. It's rarely ever one-dimensional. So this is one of my favorite diagrams. You see in the middle here, it says client changes goals. Most people complain about that on a project. Clients change the goals. Is that a problem when a client changes the goals? Is it a problem? Well, it depends. No, it doesn't depend. It's part of a problem. The rest of this diagram is the entire problem. The client changing the goals is just part of it. The outcomes, which you don't like, are cost overruns, time to late, wrong results. People are fed up, the team's fed up, and no one comes to you again. But this is the whole problem. The problem is, oh my goodness, we're running late. Why? We had to redo tasks. Why? Because we had errors. Why? Because we can't catch up. So there are multiple causes for this. So when you think about problem, it's usually multi-dimensional, but tends to have a small number of underlying anchors. But the whole thing is the problem. The things at the bottom are the causes of the problem, and they're rarely ever more than half a dozen in any complex system, even an ecosystem. Okay, so if I was to track down this, we're running late. Why? We redone the task. Why was that? Because we made errors. Why? Because we didn't evaluate the risk, or we didn't know the project status. Why? Because we didn't update it. These are things familiar to you, so you know what project problem looks like. This is in our body of knowledge. So the thing is, if you're going to solve something like habitat, you need that level of complexity of thinking. You need to map it all out. You need to map it all out from all the points of view of the different stakeholders. I'm going to stop at that point because I will talk about how you map out problems and I'll talk about how you design them. But I just want to stop because hopefully I'm starting to narrow in so you can see where I'm going with the project stuff. If I've done a good job by now, I've managed to get you to really think about the fact that we have to pay attention and rethink some of our assumptions about what sustainability is about, responsibility is about, net zero is about, because it might not be what you think it is. It wasn't what I thought it was. I thought it was about life. If I've done a good job by now, you've realized that the complexity is huge. There are multiple stakeholders, many of whom we have to act as proxies for because we can't engage with them, and that the problem is a different problem. It's not just about, let's get the CO2 out and then everything will be fine. It's far more complex than that. And I'll explain why once we get to the diagnosis and the design of the problem. And then that tells you as project leaders where to push back. Karen, any questions? Anyone want to?
Yeah, looks like Adrian's got his hand up again. Go for it, Adrian.
Yeah. When I came into this, I've had lots of conversations on this for a number of years. Goes right back to when I talked about sustainability at an APM conference. Yes. I don't know, 12 years or so ago.
Yeah.
And a question that got put to me then is, as project professionals, what's our role in sustainability? And I don't, I mean, the only kind of answer I kind of have on that is it just down to, you know, especially these days, shall we do more hybrid working rather than travel? So in other words, the personal dimension of sustainability.
Yeah.
Or do we have a role in working with our clients, our bosses, to try and persuade them that maybe as part of the solutioneering or just the even the organization culture, you know, to be trying to push a more sustainable agenda? And you know, so that's a tricky one. And the problem I'm left with there is it's hard enough, if it's the latter, it's hard enough persuading the C-level that projects exist, even when they're spending 20 or 30% of their net investment on projects, because they all come from operational backgrounds and they haven't a clue about projects, even when they're funding them. So if we can't get them to take projects seriously, how are we going to get them as project professionals to take sustainability seriously, and why are we bothering?
Sure. So I'll answer you almost in reverse. So the reason I showed you the persuasion map, which I had here, is because from a project point of view, I think understanding how to persuade people is really important. But it's not something you get many project managers who have actually got the skills and capability. So you can actually up our skills to influence the C-suite, but you have to learn persuasion. You have to learn it properly. You have to learn the tools. For example, to persuade you at that start when I used a method called extreme matching. It's a version of NLP, which basically means, you know, you think you care about the environment. I care about the environment much more than you do. Then you stop arguing with me. And it's a technique which, often being quite logical people in projects, we don't use persuasion methods. And so we're very uninfluential. The other side is the sustainability. I'm not sure anything which is labeled sustainable is sustainable. Work from home. I don't know. When you work from home, do you get more takeaways? Do you get more Amazon deliveries? I have no idea, because it's a multifaceted problem. So you might maybe be saving a little bit of carbon on your train, but you might be chopping down entire forests and digging up all sorts of other things and destroying all the fungi, for all I know. So it's so difficult to know if your actions are sustainable and responsible, because unless you follow through the implications of all of them. So I would say, I think our role is not just to take the job and then do it. We're going to have to push back, but to do that, we have to understand what we're pushing back against and why we need to push back. And I'm going to come on and explain that. Does that help?
Yes, it does. And I agree, about persuasion maps, and like you have been using them for mumble-de-mumble years, but this is a bigger problem than me persuading. It's the profession persuading.
Yes, but don't worry, we'll do it, because you're a superhero in your space, so you'll do it. We're fine. Okay, great. Let me move on and just start to look. So we've understood that if you're going to really deliver a project successfully, if the project lives in there, there's a sequence of things. You do the analysis, the engagement with the stakeholders, the understanding what the situation is. Often in project management, someone else would have done that in the business or something else. Then you have to diagnose what on earth is going on. Is it a lack of transport? Is it this? What's happening? So someone, often not the project leader, has done the diagnosis to understand this, what's required, what the challenge is. Then you have to do the design and then starting to scope it. Now, sometimes project managers get involved in that design and scoping stuff. For us, with things like net zero, by the time we get to people thinking about the whole question about what the scope is, you suddenly discover that we're into the carbon offsets and stuff. So the scope has now become more mechanical. We started off with about life, now it's more mechanical. So that's okay, we'll do that. It's a bit of a bait and switch, but we'll work with that. But even if the scope is correct, let's just assume that a net zero has the scope correct. They haven't looked into the future. This is one of my favorite examples of looking into the future. It goes back to 2016. I saw a BBC program where they were saying that thousands of women in China were rescued every single year. Why? because what happened basically is that you can read faster than I can talk, so I'm not going to read that out. Was that they had built a strategy, but they hadn't worked out something which would work now and in the future. And effectively, what they've done is they've gone, we're China, we're trying to grow, but every time we grow, there are more people. So we can grow much faster, we could stop the vision of development, or we could reduce population growth. Well, let's reduce population growth. How are we going to do that? We're going to limit all the kids, all the families having one kid. This is what we call a future map. You stand where you are and you look into the future. And they should have done this and they would have seen what was coming. So the government said, we're limiting it to one. Now, in their culture, sons traditionally worked hard in the field, made more money for the family. And anyway, after marriage, the girl would join the groom's family. So what you discovered quite quickly is that the tradition basically said that the sons are more valuable because you're going to get a daughter-in-law anyway. And so people then said, the government's only going to let us have one. If we have a girl, we should really try again. But then they get punished, okay? Food rations or whatever it is. So as ultrasound came along, they went, let's test the baby to see whether or not it's a say again? Should I keep going? A boy or a girl? Oh, I'm hearing myself. No idea why. Karen. I've lost my. Have I got myself twice? Sorted. Okay, thank you. The abortion rate for girls went through the roof. So net result of that is that there are 2 times as many boys as girls. So what happens is the boys have to leave the village to go and find a girl. They're really expensive. They have to have rare gifts. So the son's gone away. Meanwhile, hard to get hold of the new wives. So they kidnap the wives and get them married, blah, blah, blah. It's a future. It's basically, you can sit here and you can tell what the future is going to happen. You don't have to wait for it. So that's what future mapping is about. It's a way of trying to look into the future. And if you do that, you can then start thinking about how do we make sure that the bad stuff doesn't happen? How do we in advance stop that occurrence happening? Now, again, going back to net zero, you could, and I assumed, because I didn't know, that the UN and all these other bodies had done some sort of future mapping. No. The UK government has done something. No. I mentioned that before. There is no future proofing. And the way we know that is because I'll just show you some pictures, which will just prove. This is a mine. I think here they're mining cobalt or lithium. Human beings, basically slaves. The thing's run by warlords. This is a pile of turbine blades. It's not possible to recycle wind turbine blades, so you stack them up or you bury them. I'll show you. This is child labor in one of the mines because guess what? They're run by warlords. They don't care. I think this one is a lithium mine. These are Uyghurs who are working as slaves in China to make your solar panel you put on your roof to show off to everyone how cool you are. This is Mojo, the Mojave Desert turtle, who has been moved because somebody put a solar panel farm in the middle of the desert. Great idea. And this very rare turtle is now almost extinct. Okay, this is another open pit human mining. This is a poor kid who I don't know who he is, but you know there are millions and millions of side effects. Nobody has future-proofed anything. So as project managers, you'll do your part, but you're not necessarily helping the sustainability. You know, yeah, you're driving to work in your electric car. Great, you're sustainable in that form, but these poor kids, they don't even have a future to sustain. So the thing is so complex and the conversations are so banal that we can't actually fix the problem unless we push back on the momentum which all this has gained. And that's why, as I think it is, project managers are central. Look, the way the world works is people have ideas. They have all sorts of ideas. Teenagers, bureaucrats, they all come up with ideas. Nothing happens until we make it happen. We make the world happen. Project managers, engineers, designers, we make the world happen. No one else does, you know? So when you're building a house, the contractor will turn up, the builders knock the walls down. That's what makes reality, not the architect's plans. So when it comes to implementation, that's where we have the big responsibility. I'm going to stop for a second in case there are any questions. Then I'm going to talk about how do we take this responsibility and how do we know we should be pushing back? And which project should we work on and which project shouldn't we? And I can do some personal stuff about clients I've stopped working with or I charge them 4 times as much because I think what they're doing doesn't help the world and stuff. Any questions, Karen?
Yeah, I mean, I would go one step. I mean, I would go one step further. When I was talking up at the APM conference in Scotland, I said projects create the future, which to me had been self-evident for 40 years, but evidently that was news. So I think sometimes at the sort of grassroots level, when we're implementing, we're so focused on delivery, we're not thinking that. And I mean, when we first started RPM, people were saying to us, yeah, we sort of want to do this stuff, but we don't know how. But also there was a tendency to think that this was somebody else's problem, or somebody else will tell us how to fix this.
No.
And it's just bonkers, absolutely bonkers. Anyway, anybody else want to come in with a thought or a question?
Okay, so what I've done is I've put a link up here, cube.cc/RPM Conversation Club. And for the moment, I put the LinkedIn links on there, and also the sales pitch to Colin Cook. But I can put links to all the tools I'm mentioning, so you can dive deeper into them if you want. So when it comes to the implement bit, often projects start at that point. Project managers, program managers get involved at that point. The problem is you're now implementing something which hasn't engaged the right stakeholders, hasn't got the right diagnosis, it's not broad enough, and has been designed with trillions of potential bad side effects. So how do you know if things you're being told are roughly true? Now, this is one of the big headaches. You'd have heard about things like fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And a lot of that is because most people haven't been taught that there are about half a dozen ways of being able to tell if something is wrong. It's hard to tell if something's right, but it's easier to tell if something's wrong. And I've put them on this particular performance enhancement tool, which is called May It Be True. So if somebody makes a statement, I've got one of my clients, a company which makes solar panels. So of course I charge them 4 times as much, and I give them a hard time because I want to change them, okay? So they pay attention, and then I bully them, and then they start to understand they shouldn't be sending Uyghurs off to build them for them, etc. So the first one is what we call predict and check. If somebody says something like, oh, solar panels can save the world, you go, well, if that's true, then you predict what's going to happen, write it in your diary, and then see if it happens. That's what I did with the future map. You should do a future map to see whether it's going to happen, what's going to come next. And then once you've done that, you can see whether it's good or bad. So that's one way of doing it. A lot of the data people are using when they're trying to predict comes from, I call it sort of populist stuff. Now, the headache is most people don't do sums, and the people who do sums are mostly financial people. They've not got doctorates in engineering and stuff like that. They have never done research. So I'm showing you this diagram because if I was talking to a CFO, they would look at the chart and they wouldn't be sure what these vertical bars are. I'm being rude, okay? Because they work with numbers, 2 + 2 is 4. But if you measure temperature, well, first of all, it depends on what time of the day, where you measure it, what method you use. Do you use a mercury thermometer or thermocouple? Was the sun out? Did you do it on the, etc. So for every measurement method, you have what are called confidence limits. So confidence limits tell you how likely that something is in that band. So they will hear about temperatures going up by 1 degree globally, and they think it's a real thing. It can't be a real thing because the confidence limits must be about 30, 40 degrees easily. I mean, the room you're sitting in, you are 32 degrees or whatever it is human bodies are. Your computer is probably slightly warmer. Your table is slightly cooler, 25. The cup of coffee is near 70, and by your window it's 8. So what's the temperature on average? And I don't mean mean, I mean mode. Or do I mean median? It's not possible. So when you see data like that, you know you've got to push back if something like this is the basis of your project. The other thing which you have to be aware of is if somebody says, we're doing this because it's on a trend. So I've got here sort of typical thing which a fund manager would do to say, oh, my fund performs much better than the others. So that is usually not useful information. It's not something you should pay attention to. You should know you have to push back. There's a chap called Darren Brown, and if you ever saw his episode where he wins all the horse races, you'll understand how the fund managers do it. You don't launch one fund, and he didn't just back one horse. He backed all the horses in the races multiple times in the first race. Okay, then the horses run. One or two, one of them wins. Okay, Then he takes all the people who would bet on that horse and then he spreads them across the next horses. And then one of those wins. So what happens is somebody in the group is seeing that Darren Brown is choosing the winning horse each time. Same thing happens with climate models. There are thousands of climate models, and the ones they quote are the ones which are not wrong yet, the ones which haven't lost the race. So if you're working on a project which is based on modeling, you really need to go back and check before you put all your effort and your life into making it happen. Second method is the predict and check one, is what I call the baby method. Baby method is really useful because it's really easy, nomological method. All you have to do is think about baby. Baby sees something, they touch it, that's 2 senses, then they taste it, 3 senses. So somebody says, we've got to do this quickly, we've got to put in a new barrier and make sure that we give money to someone because the sea level's rising. I'm just using that as an example. Sea level's rising. Look at my measurements. That's one method of looking at it. The sea level's rising. What else would you expect? Well, you'd expect places like Venice to be more flooded than they've ever been flooded before. So you phone your friend in Venice and say, are you more flooded than you've ever been before? And he says, no, not really. Is the map still the same size? Yes. So it's not hard to work out which bits of the story about trying to save the planet are real and not real. Why am I telling you this? Because this business is so lucrative that lots of people are getting rich and they're pushing projects which they claim are sustainable, but I think they'll kill all the fungi. So as a project manager, I think you need to get into the habit of questioning where your projects come from, questioning whether the data underpinning it makes sense, getting people to think about that, checking there isn't a different design to solve the problem before you put 3 years of your life into helping people make that future. But that's just me. I mean, you might just enjoy making rubbish projects. The other thing is, if it's a really difficult project, there is a high probability it's going to be foggy. It's not going to be clear because we probably haven't done it before. So when something's presented as very painful, oh, what we're going to do is we're going to make lots and lots of electric cars. You go, hang on. How do you know that that's the solution? You know it's probably not true because fog happens when we're doing new stuff. And most of what we're trying to do is new stuff. So it's unlikely we'll be totally clear on the goals or the method. So on that one, I would say the real secret there is look at the skills the project leader brings, because they'll need to use those and not other ones. They need to be able to learn, they need to be able to communicate, they need to be able to build trust and so on. Those become quite crucial. And you can tell if what you're doing is off-piste because suddenly it's not even about saving the fungi. It's all about, you know, the new projects, the solution looking for a problem, 15-minute cities, no coffee for you, I saw on a headline recently, to save the planet. It's just, in my very humble opinion, nonsense. Okay, so let's do some thinking about what we're trying to do. I'm going to shut up for a second, and that gives us a chance to have a conversation. Karen, will it be okay to spin? There are not that many of us, so if you could just call out somebody's name, and then each person gets a chance to ask a question or make a comment, and then hopefully I'll answer really quickly, and then we can move from there.
I can slow down. People will suddenly disappear when I put them in the spotlight.
Well, if you don't,
okay, well, Adrian's had several comments already, so shall we go to Alan?
Warn them who's going to be next, and then give them 2 names, and then start with 1, then 2 names. Then they've got time to think. And they won't panic.
Okay, I'm going to go down the list I've got on my screen that's in alphabetic order. So Alan or Edward Becker? Do either of you want to come in with a comment?
Yeah, hopefully my camera's gone on. This is interesting. Only that it's making things a lot more complicated than I thought they were going to be.
Oh,
Can you still
I
hear
thought
me?
it was keeping it simple.
I mean, what I was hoping to see is with project managers. You know, surely there are some simple things that project managers should be doing anyway that are within the control in terms of delivering projects. And if we're going to help affect or impact net zero, you know, we want to increase productivity or particularly productive utilization of people. We're wanting to reduce timescales of projects, but not burn a whole lot more energy in a little less time. And the other thing we're wanting to do is eliminate rework. So irrespective of all the other complexities, which I've now got a better appreciation of, are there not some, I hate to say rules, it should probably be more guidelines these are the principles that project managers should always be working to anyway.
Should I do that one? I'll do that one. So yes, eliminating waste does all of that, because if you don't waste it, you've not made stuff, you've not made plastic, you're not doing it as good. So project success at the moment, I don't know what your views are, but I usually describe it as a quarter of them are disaster, half of them are so-so, and a quarter of them we pretend we got them right. Okay, so we've got something to work on. So why are projects generally not delivering? In my view, there are a number of reasons. The first is we start the project, and if you get all the people together in a room and you say, this project, what do you think is going to go wrong? If you got them in a room, they would make a list of all the problems you're going to see, but you never get them in the room to ask them to brainstorm what's going to go wrong. We just start the project with our plans and our scope. Then we start moving forward. And then we do the weirdest thing. The way we control the project is, imagine you're driving, but you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. We do a bit, then we look back. Whether it's agile or whatever, waterfall, we do a bit, then we look back. That's crazy. We're just using the mirror. So the way I get people to do it is I say, first thing we do is we're going to build a glide path. Get everyone together across all the stakeholders, sit them down for 2 days. What's going to go wrong in this project? We make the list, and then we make sure that we've done something to fix all of them. That particular contractor's flaky. Just get rid of all that stuff, okay? Then that also tells us that the project leader has to focus on real risks. They can't just pick up one of these and then fix it and then pretend they're a hero. Okay, so that's one thing. The other thing which you have to do is just-in-time learning. It's unlikely, however professional a project manager is, that they know everything when they start. So what happens is, I say, okay, we're starting this thing. Let's do like a little health check. What things are you good at and what are you rubbish at? Okay, and we go, I'm really good at stakeholders, I'm rubbish at negotiation. Great. And then you give them just-in-time learning just for those topics, just for that project, whether it's a coach or whatever method you use, etc. So you skill up in order to deliver that. So you've de-skilled it, you've taken the risk out of the project. That will solve the people side of things. It will solve your time scale thing because they're not screwing up, and your rework. So those two things are things which I've talked about forever, but people love running projects badly because I think it's more fun. Thanks, Alan. Should we keep going?
Okay, thanks, Eddie.
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I'll just give you one quick thing you could do at the start of a project. You could ask, what's the impact on the fungi? Because if we destroy all the fungi on the planet, there is no life left on Earth.
There is no life.
Okay, anybody else? I don't think we've got time to go through everybody, but Edward, Becca, do you want to come in? Oh, Gavin Jones has put his hand up. Gavin, do you want to come in?
Go for it, Gavin.
Hi, I've got a quick question, which is in the back of my mind. How do we engage the silent stakeholders?
Yeah, so when you, I did a project ages ago with people who were blind, and use that one. I can use actually. I've done loads of projects like that. I worked lots with IDEO. So what you have to do, we did one in a hospital. I'll give you that one because that's much easier. And the question was, what does the patient experience? So what we did was we actually went into the hospital and lay on a trolley and then followed through what they do to a patient. And what you realize is that as a patient, you spend like 90% of your time looking at this really crappy ceiling because you're on your back and you don't know what's going on. And there are all these sounds and noises around you. Okay. So what we did was he stepped into the role of the stakeholder. So if you're going to do it and you're doing it seriously, one of you should play, I'm Mr. Fungi. One of you says, I'm Mr. Cow. The other one says, I'm Mr. Plankton. The other one says, I'm Mr. Bird. Okay, we're planning to put in wind turbines. What do you think, Mr. Fungi? Great idea, except you will dig me up and put a big concrete slab, which means you've dug somewhere else up to make the concrete. I'm not very happy. What do you think, Mr. Bird? Well, I was flying, but you just chopped me in half. So you can actually quite easily start to understand properly what the impact of the project is, you know, for the silent stakeholders and even for the people. You know, it's unlikely you've spoken to everyone on the planet. So when people say, I want to make the world a better place, they're basically psychopaths because you can't talk to all the stakeholders, so you don't know what they want. And if you insist on doing it your way, then you're a psychopath. So you have to step into their roles. So one of the things, for example, with net zero and even things like pushing the price of energy, poor people who normally live hand to mouth, they suddenly can't afford to heat their houses or feed themselves. But we never stepped into that. Does that help?
Sorry, yes, it does. Thank you for that. I guess the next part is how do you model it and weight it so that
That's where you and I do the collaboration bit. Great. Okay,
fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the great question, Gavin, and thank you, Eddie. Anyone else like to jump in? So there's quite a few names I recognise.
I'm really suspicious of SP guest. Got no name. Oh yeah, I've got one from Shirley.
Go on then, Shirley.
Now I've got to find my mute button. Well, I'm just sitting here thinking, well, RPM team knows all this stuff. Why don't students know this stuff? Why don't PMI know this stuff? All right, what's in it for them to avoid it all? It's making you a nice lot of money, Professor Obeng, I'm sure.
Well, knowing how to save the planet.
No, exactly. It's a big problem to persuade everybody.
Okay, so make sure I've understood. So you're saying, why does everyone not know this stuff, or do they know it and they just don't do it?
I think they avoid it.
Yeah, well, you see, there's a quote which says, if somebody's job depends on believing something, they will. And there's so much funding around climate net zero, coming from government, coming from NGOs, coming from people who are investing in new turbines, that everyone's present. I got into trouble over HS2 because I was one of the people who was most vocal against it as a project, because I said it wasn't the 21st century project for a country of our size. You should move the electrons and not the atoms. And I sort of said that forever. And I went to a conference once and I was speaking, and then after me, the HS2 person was speaking. So we both did our bits, and then everybody went to go and talk to him afterwards, because he said in his presentation, and we've got these massive grants and we're going to be doing all this consulting work and we're going to need people to help. And literally the whole group flocked around him like bees around a flower. So there's a level of self-interest. But again, you know, people are becoming more human. Slowly, especially over the past few years, we started reordering our values. You know, we were all chasing money and stuff, but now we know things which last, transcendence, you know, love, joy, they were here before us, they'll be here after us, truth and stuff. That's what matters. People are figuring this out slowly. That's why so many people want to have more of a life and not just go to work. Underneath that comes nature, because nature is our silent heritage. That's what allows us to function. Then come the human beings and their family units and their societies. And then all the technology is just there to support us. And people are working this out. And once you figure that out, you can't go to work to use the technology, which is going to damage the society for real and nature, and actually reduce the vision of the future. But it'll take a while because it's bravery. So I get brickbats all the time. I really don't care. But I think people see me doing these crazy things, and then hopefully it makes them braver. And that's probably what you're asking.
All right. So we have to do crazy things. Okay, got that.
You have to do what other people think are crazy.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no,
thanks.
Okay, thanks, Shirley. Thank you for that, Eddie. I'm really pleased you've mentioned values, and I agree with you. I think there is a shift. We are starting to become more human. It was interesting, one of the earlier questions talked about becoming more productive, doing things quicker. Yeah, well, at what price? I mean, why are we focusing on those things when we're busy destroying not just the planet, but the things we depend upon? So I'm really pleased you've highlighted that. Adrian, if it's quick, because I also want to go back to Steve to give him a final question. So Adrian next, and then we'll finish with Steve Wake.
No problem. I'll make it a statement rather than question, and it's kind of what we need to do is get it into the culture in our project management profession, yes, so that we've got scale and more influence. How we do that, I haven't a clue.
So well, let's talk about it together. It can be done, but remember, there's a sort of £1 billion marketing thing going the other direction. So we have to be very clever, and we have to help people who are starting to look at their values to step up, and that drives the culture. Because, you know, we're still monkeys, you know, so we copy each other. So you can build a culture by just behaving. So that's the answer. Steve's got a last question.
Yeah, I think part of the answer as well about the how is what, again, in relation to HS2, you need to take control of the narrative. We need to start talking about all these things. It's not just about productivity. It is about how we become more human. Anyway, Steve, I'll give you the final word, or
Well,
the final question, maybe.
before the broadcast started, I wrote my question, which was, how do we move from I agree, I understand, which is a lot of, I think people on this program will be in that position, to I can, will, must, am doing something. But people need to be encouraged, inspired, led.
Yeah.
One should also, I wondered, Eddie, whether we're sort of, in order to explain this or to not to manipulate it, but in some way to purpose it, are we into systems thinking a bit here? Don't answer that yet.
It's complex.
Don't answer that, but and in my experience, so I've touched upon the knowing doing gap there. I still despair that human beings, when they're given the opportunity to get out, will nod their head sagely at a horrific news broadcast and then go about their business as though it's never happened, because it's not in their front room, it's not happening to them. And another cynical phrase is, if it ain't in the contract, mate, it don't get done. Must we find ways of placing into codes of practice, contract, these kinds of statements, this kind of thinking to enforce this? I know people hate being told what to do. I also know that there's pushback in law. Law is actually about, in a democracy, is not about necessarily being told absolutely what to do, because law only works here, for example, I'm told, and I think it's true, if there's consent, if people actually tolerate, or maybe not even consent, but toleration of the law. Otherwise, people just disobey it. You know, they find ways to go deviant to it. So, are there things that we can place into contract, into specifications of projects? Should we get more involved with the creation of the scope, the understanding of what it is that we're getting into? A very brief, quick advert. The project controls standard that we're introducing, the specification standard, does have some of these questions. There are questions incorporated into this specification standard about carbon, about sustainability, for the controls community to ask of whoever the stakeholders or the senior management are. We want to get away from controls just accepting blithely, get on with the job or you're fired, you know, or don't answer back. We want to give them a voice. We want to give them permission to assess what they're doing. But it's still human. You know, do you have enough faith in human beings to do this? That's the end. I'll shut up now, because I feel that we could go on for hours here.
Yeah, sure. It's really just to wrap up everything. So what I was hoping to do was to really set the scene that we've got a different problem. So even if they've written, what are we doing about sustainability? You have to have question mark, what's your definition? Because without that pushback, it's important. And it goes back to the first question. You have to look upstream. You have to look at the source of what you're being asked to do. You need to check it for yourself, because someone's getting rich off it. So chances are they'll push it, even if it's going to be terrible for every single fungus. Okay, they don't necessarily care. Yes, there are people who are getting more courageous. Yes, we are focusing on our values. And I think the more people say it and do it, the more they understand. But remember, a lot of the things people believe about the planet and saving the planet, they've never thought about, like me. They've just heard it over and over again. We must do something good. So someone comes along and says, oh, well, it's a real problem. You can't do anything about it on your own, but leave it with me, and here are my metrics, and fill this in, and then we leave it with them. But actually, they're not doing anything useful. So unfortunately, we have to step up. And your question about, should we write it into the controls? Probably, but I'm not sure how you do it, because it's so complex. Laws, as I understand it, living in all us in UK, with the 4 laws, aren't there? From the Bill of Rights, Magna Carta, you know, don't steal people's things, don't do them harm, don't cause them loss, don't tell them lies, whatever it is. That's it. And then everything else above that is an act. It's come from Parliament. It's not a law. It's legal, but it's not lawful. And so if you go to the roots of this country and you go, right, so don't cause loss to your fungi, then we go, right, that makes sense, because that gives you a guidance of what we should do. We're going to run this project, we're going to chop a lot of legals in half, and the odd turtle will be pissed off, you know. So it just going back to the Bill of Rights and fundamentals for project managers helps us guide ourselves as to what's responsible. And I think asking the questions will tell us if the thing really is sustainable. And what I mean by sustainable is it's back in an ecosystem. There are no waste products. You know, there's no plastic going into the sea, like nature tries to do.
Lovely. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Eddie. Well, we're now after 5 o'clock, so it just leaves me to thank you and thank all of our audience. Thank you for the great questions and comments there have been. And we hope to see you all next time, next month.
There's a link. Don't forget the link. I hope you all wrote it down.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I can share those. Well, I can put a link on from our website onto that as well. So
yeah,
thank you very much indeed, Eddie.
We'll post that. We'll post that out, and I think we've captured this in a recording. So again,
brilliant.
We'll bundle that up and make it available probably on YouTube or something of that nature. Okay.
Thank you very much,
so
everyone.
Thank you very much, all of you.
It's going to be great. We're going to do good stuff together. Thanks.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Eddie.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks very much.